and welcome to Merge's second public event. I'm George Mark, co-founder of Merge. I want to mention that we're recording this. So if there's some reason that any of you don't want to be visible, although I don't think you will be basically visible unless you speak, you might want to mute your not be visible, make yourself invisible. I'm sorry, I'm probably getting away with words. Working as organizer and an activist in reproductive justice and health spaces, we at Merge do our best not to shy away from tough conversations or political moments. We want to share our grief and sorrow for the lives lost and horrific destruction in Israel and Palestine. We recognize this is top of mind and heart for many, if not all of us, as human beings. Please join us for a moment of silence. Let's also now maybe just take a few deep breaths. Now I'd like to turn things over to Justin Haas, our facilitator today. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, George. And I appreciate you giving us space to consider what's going on in the moment in the world right now. My name is Justin Haas. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of the co-founders of Merge. Merge stands for Men for Equity and Reproductive Justice, and it was formed as a support space, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and other women of color led organizations. Merge supports full access to abortion and all other reproductive justice rights. As a group of men, we commit to unlearning the continued systemic legacy of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, and their threat to body sovereignty. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we get started, I want to share who is with us today. Ms. Diana Whitten and Ms. Amy Merrill. I'll start with Diana just to give a brief, quick introduction of who these people are, and then I will be able to get into kind of what we're all here for, which is a panel discussion. Diana Whitten premiered her featured documentary Vessel at South by Southwest, winning the Audience Award at the Jury Prize for Political Courage. The film about groundbreaking crusaders for self-managed abortion all over the world was distributed worldwide by Netflix and screened for 400 audiences as a centerpiece of an international audience engagement campaign. Prior to this, she worked for 15 years in independent film, children's television, and theater, and as a director of communications at Ford Foundation, IFP. She currently writes, directs, and consults for nonfiction series and features, and is developing 2 new nonfiction series. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, and my personal favorite, Democracy Now!, among other media outlets. Additional awards include the Sheffield Peter Windicott Award, Adrian Shelley Excellence in Filmmaking, and the SEMA Lens to Action Jury Award, and last but not least, a Fulbright Scholarship. Next, we have Ms. Amy Merrill, is an artist and activist working at the intersection of creating communications, technology, and social change. In 2015, she co-founded Plan C. Very excited to have you on the call, along with Alyssa Wells and Francine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Coito. Great, okay. To transform access to abortion pills by mail in the United States. And under her leadership, Plan C has grown to annual audiences of millions of website visitors, press reach in the billions, and nationwide partnerships in research, creativity, and tech. Amy was recently named Fast Company's 2023 Most Creative People in Business, and she serves as an advisor to the new EC brand Julie, or Julia Care, or juliecare.co. She holds 20 plus years navigating complex and unsolved social issues, from human trafficking to economic injustice to gender equity, which led her to reproductive health and access as a current focus. She says as a futurist, Amy writes and performs music in post-apocalyptic space folk duo formerly Alien or formerlyalien.com. And I hope, I think we were just in contact with another co-founder of Merge, Russell, about potentially sharing some of your music at a later point. So I'm very excited for that. Thank you so much for being on this call. I feel a little bit overwhelmed with who we have here because of two incredible people who have stuck with their convictions their whole lives and are pushing to create a better liberatory world for all women and all birthing people. So before we kind of jump into the work that you do now, I would love to kind of dial back the clock and ask you kind of about your childhoods, if possible, and what moments throughout your life, maybe as a young person, brought you to the moment that we're in right now. And I'll just pass it to Amy first.
Sure. All right, I'll try to sum it up. Let's see. I do credit my upbringing in Santa Cruz, California, as part of the reason that I went on an activist journey. I think Santa Cruz has always been, or at least in the last couple of decades, has been a hotbed of a few different perspectives coming together, of a lot of activism because of the diversity and because of the sort of, I want to say, hippie nature of who ends up living here. And then tech, is right next to the Silicon Valley as the tech boom happened. And then arts and creativity has always been a value. And so I think I grew up exposed to all three of those things pretty intensely in my family and in my community. And so I had the privilege and the luxury of being able to kind of navigate those early years, figuring out what I liked and what resonated, but also feeling a real obligation for how I was going to use my position in the world to try to make change. And what happened was that as I was finishing up college, my dad passed away very suddenly from an infectious disease. And so that really rocked my world, and it set me on a path. I think at that point, I had a kind of binary decision in mind. I was either going to go try to make money and go the for-profit route, or I was going to go nonprofit and try to make change. And of course, because of my programming thus far, and then the watching my dad's life end so suddenly, I went on this nonprofit journey. So from there, I got to do a master's in nonprofit management in New York, and I got exposure to a lot of different organizations and issue areas, but I kept gravitating toward the social justice ones, even when it was first in the arts. I was working for an organization called the Jazz Foundation. I was assisting elder musicians in crisis, and I was seeing the dimensions of challenge. These older, especially men of color, had these amazing careers, and then suddenly they were in retirement age and they had nothing. They had no safety net, they had no fallback resources. And so it was already like an opportunity to examine our systems at work for someone like that, who had achieved so much, but then done it in a certain way that didn't allow for retirement structures. So anyway, I got to see those different issues. And like I mentioned in my bio, I just kept coming back to gender and reproductive health and access as a focus. I worked on anti-human trafficking, where I saw some of it really up front in your face, and started to ask these questions about why is it so broken? Why are these things so broken, so upside down? And when I met Francine Coito in 2015, and she sat me down and explained abortion pills to me, and that they were available all around the world. They had become very normalized in other countries, and in countries that we think of as, being less advanced or whatnot, then people were already just adapting this method as something that was theirs to manage themselves, to have agency over their bodies, and to have direct access through pharmacies or online sources to the pills themselves. And it was transforming the nature of abortion in these countries. So that's how Plan C started. It was first this concept of, why don't we have a Plan C for a late period, for a failure or non-access to birth control or emergency contraception? And then it grew from that into a public health initiative and a creative campaign to really increase access, as well as continue to change those cultural narratives around abortion.
Thank you. I just want to say quickly that I love that there's this understanding of using your skills to benefit the reproductive justice movement, or the movement at large. for liberation. And I think that what's critical, I just learned about another organization called Elevated Access, which is a group of pilots that help fly people to abortion spaces or abortion clinics so that they can get the care that they need. And again, this is the moment in which, you know, I try to push men to keep thinking about, don't try to shift your other talents to just try to fit into the social justice fight or the reproductive justice fight. You can use the talents that you already have and engage those and then use them purposefully. So thank you. Diana.
That's I'm so glad you just said that, Justin. That's actually like the core of my message and my whole sort of business being here today. When you were asking about a childhood memory, the first thing that I thought of was I grew up in liberal Massachusetts, and my next door neighbor was my age, and her mother ran the Regional Coalition for Choice. So I was, you know, folding flyers when I was in 4th grade. And we would go to these protests, and I had this one crucial moment where we were at one, and there's like, you know, everyone on one side, keep your rosaries off our ovaries, and everyone on the other side yelling whatever they were yelling back. And there was this guy in the middle just holding up a sign that said legalize cannabis. And I just had this moment as a 4th grader, and I was like, what is this doing? Like, what's happening here? And I think there's such a, you know, there's such a need for protests, the optics. We need them. We need to show that kind of congregation. But for me, I didn't know how to contribute to this until I realized that I had a skill set that could be useful to it. And by then, you know, I had gone through school. I had studied, you know, I was an art student. I had lived in New York. I had worked in film. I had lived abroad, and I had seen, you know, the disparities of abortion access across the world. Knew I wanted to do something about it, but didn't know what until a friend of mine introduced me to the work of Rebecca Gompertz and Women on Waves and Women on Web. And it was this light bulb that just went off that this was such a great opportunity for a story. You know, as a storyteller, it was such an opportunity for a film that could be told that offered a new entry into the conversation about abortion that so many people have a hard time accessing. Here was a story about technology, and it was about intricate legal issues, and it was about adventure. There was a ship and this like ballsy, you know, woman and the superstar in the middle of it who had a completely bombastic, ridiculous, absurd idea and was following through on it and was combining art and, I mean, she was an artist with a doctor's, you know, a medical degree, and she could sail. You know, that's the hard thing to put together into suddenly activism. And that was so inspiring to me. And, you know, I think one of the things that Rebecca is good at is recognizing strengths in other people. And I was a very green filmmaker at the time, and she let me make this film about her. And that was also emboldening and something I carry with me now, both in terms of being a good boss and also in terms of like, you know, it was just a great moment for me to get that from somebody. So yeah, using your skill set, that's how I got into this. I had a skill set that could apply.
I think in one of the most powerful parts, right, in the film for me while watching it, and I would love for you to just take a quick second after this and just explain the film more broadly, because I think there's people on this call who may not have that relationship, but just the fact that you have to trust women and this idea of bring me your full selves and we'll trust you. And you did a phenomenal job in this documentary, getting clips that are so helpful, bringing the audience from one spot to the next. And so take a quick second, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing a little bit more about the vessel. How was it filmed? What was the strategy behind the film, in terms of how you shot it? Not so much the purpose, or not so much the political piece, but more like what was your creative lens in terms of how you shot this film?
So the film follows Dr. Rebecca Gompertz, who's a Dutch doctor, who sails a ship around the world to countries where abortion is illegal. And she works with local organizations to bring women into international waters, which is usually around, 12 miles offshore, where she can legally give people the abortion pill at sea. And that is basically a big, huge spectacle that attracts a whole bunch of media attention to a phone number that's on the side of the ship. And that phone number, or now website, is something that people well beyond the reach of the ship can call and find volunteers, trained volunteers that can help them use telemedicine to self-manage an abortion through pills, and also to find the pills. So the ship is exciting, but it's a front to a system that can help more people. Anyway, that's what the film's about. And wait, what was the second thing you asked? The our creative lens, right? So yeah, so I mean, going into this, like I said before, I thought that it was such an interesting conversation starter. Great character, but what we wanted to do at the time, medical abortion, this was 15 years ago or so, and medical abortion was still not the gold standard of care. Abortion with pills was not, it was actually quite contested, and there were a lot of people who were still scared of it. And I had a really hard time even fundraising for the film, because every time I presented the idea, it turned into a conversation about, wait, what are these pills? And the whole first half of the fundraising pitch was all about explaining the medicine. So it was very divisive at the time. And in a nutshell, a lot of the risks that women on web took at the time, and others who were promoting the use of this pill, is the research that was then codified into what led to the normalization of these pills. So what I wanted to do with the film was a similar construct to what they were doing with the ship, which is to bury that information within the film and have it be a mass media event, so to speak, that had the protocols of how to take the pills within the film. So within the film, there is an animation that talks people through how to take the pills and how much to use and what to do in the case of complication. And of course, the film also contains the website that people could go to reach women on web in case there was more complications. Anyway, so in order to do that at the time, there was all kinds of legal work that we had to go through, because it was it was fine in the end. We never had a problem, but people were so scared of it because it wasn't normalized yet. But that was the goal of the film, to tell a good story that got people interested, that could start this conversation, and then to publicize the protocols.
Thank you for mentioning kind of so broadly the role of media, and we could go down that pathway around, God, there was a moment in the film where you get to have a moment, I forget which European country, and that's on me, but where you get to have a televised understanding of how to take the pill. And this was 10 or 12 years ago, and it's like on screen, you're learning how to do this, and it's groundbreaking for thousands, if not millions, of women or birthing people around the world. Before we go down kind of the media route, I am curious about really breaking some of the myths that are so inherent in the reproductive justice world, and especially abortion access. And so could you both highlight a couple of just misconceptions or myths or things that, or I guess, moments that you run into that you were like, wow, I wish these things would just be dispelled on a more national or international level? And Amy, I'd love to hear from you first.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a few that come up almost every time. There's a few really persistent ones. One is that the pills are not safe, which is what Diana was speaking to. There's still this lasting perception that taking them, especially now the conversation has shifted more to the self-managed, so to speak, versus provider-driven care, which we could talk a little bit more about what those differences are. The pills has always been a method that it inherently has a lot of self-managed aspects to it, right? You're given a medication, you take it either in front of a provider, as has been mandated in the past, or now you take it at home, but with a hotline or a provider on speed dial, and then 24 to 48 hours, you take the second set of meds. And so a lot of that ends up being an experience that someone is watching their own symptoms, they're understanding their own body and what to watch out for, they're knowing who they can call if anything doesn't feel right, or any of the symptoms match up with the problems that they've learned about. All that to say that there's still a notion that the method is dangerous, and that's for good reasons. Also, there's been a really strong narrative in the reproductive justice health access movement in the decades prior to this about all of the unsafe ways that people were having to get abortions. So we're in the business right now of trying to unwind those narratives, take back an image like the coat hanger, because it's just not the reality anymore. Abortions that are happening outside of the system, or that are happening In states where abortion care has been banned, those abortions can be done medically safely with pills up to recommended window of time is 12 weeks. There are always going to be situations where people need in-person care. That's why we advocate as well for all options to be available, for someone to know about the full spectrum. We're trying to reinforce the information about pills. We're trying to ideally alleviate the burden on the in-person clinics and try to make sure people know this is an option over here. But there's always going to be a reason for people to need to travel or have in-person care. So just kind of roundabout way of saying, yes, we're always working to dispel that myth of the pills being dangerous or that self-managed abortion is dangerous. We actually believe this medication should be over the counter, and that's part of our long-term vision. The other very understandable realm of confusion and chaos right now is around legality. And that's because that's how these laws and bans are designed, is to create confusion and chaos and to prevent people from getting abortions, even if it's not expressly prohibited, or even if the language of the law is not even targeting the individual. So that's one point that we bring people back to, is the understanding that in the large majority of the states, self-managing an abortion is not a criminal act. There's nothing wrong with it legally. That's not to say that someone still couldn't be criminalized. We know that in the US, people are criminalized for all sorts of reasons, and that marginalized communities are inherently at higher risk of criminalization. And so throughout our materials, you'll see that we're consistently referring to the Repro Legal Helpline, which exists to help someone get their individual questions answered. We're consistently referencing legal risks so that someone knows what they need to know in order to make a decision that's best for them. But we feel it's really important for journalists, for people seeking abortion, for organizations to really understand what is that law saying, and how can we be helping keep abortion seekers safe as they search for information, as they weigh their options, as they make these decisions, as they consider all sorts of factors in their lives that we cannot even know about, right? Every person's situation is completely unique. And so what we hear in the research also is that someone who's making a decision from a restricted state is often weighing legality alongside of weighing all these other factors about their health, about their families, about their economic situation. So these are just really complex decisions, and our job is to try to present as much information as we can to support their decision making, including, again, trying to clear up a bit of that misconception about legality while never offering legal advice and never downplaying the risk that someone might be weighing for their own individual situation. So those are two things that come to mind as some of the biggest questions.
I think you named a couple of opportunities for men to get involved there, whether it's distilling information, whether it's understanding the information fully. I know that you're going to share a story in a few minutes about how abortion access affects men. But then I want to pass it to you. Misconceptions, if you want to just add to Amy's, or if you have another one.
I mean, everything Amy said. I guess one broad one I thought of before was just that, which is good to have in your back pocket, is that making abortion illegal doesn't stop abortion. If you look at the stats between countries where it's legal and countries where it's illegal, they're the same, if not probably more in the illegal countries that they're not being reported. So I just think that's one to keep on hand.
Yeah, that makes me think of too. One of my colleagues in the space, a gal named Amelia Bonau, runs Shout Your Abortion with an amazing team. And the way she talks about it these days is that any anti-abortion entities, organizations, the vision that they're painting is a fantasy. It's not a reality. There's no reality where in the US abortion just doesn't exist. Like, for all sorts of reasons, not even just the question of personal autonomy and decision making around one's life and individual circumstances, also just like medically, that pregnancy is a journey, non-pregnancy is a journey. There's just no such reality. And that we hear these stories of anti-abortion politicians quietly making sure their partners, their daughters, whoever gets to have the abortion, right. It's not real. So I feel like that is an important one of many, many dimensions of the conversation that I'm kind of appreciating that's emerging right now. It's like, what exactly is that vision that they're pushing toward? And, it's not real.
I love that you brought that up, because that was one of the most, I mean, it's the most true, and it's the most thing, it's the concept that's hard to refute the most. And in the film, in Vessel, it says 45 million abortions are done every year. There's no medical intervention done more than an abortion around the world. And Rebecca says it's just because we're women and we're invisible and we're silenced and we don't talk about it, and she says nobody fucking knows. And so it's a really powerful line of, are the hopes of these anti-abortion groups the fact that it's okay for women to die, it's okay for women to have unsafe situations like this. And so what do you say to a situation where you're seeing this harassment from anti-abortion groups who want to create this world that is a fantasy? Is there any kind of room to try to create a connection with those groups? And if not, why?
Well, I would say I don't even know how much time we want to spend here in this room trying to grapple with the logic of anti-abortion activists. I think that there is a lot of contradiction in that approach, in that philosophy. I personally I believe in being curious. I believe in, approaching any conversation with someone with opposing views to mine with curiosity, with seeing them as a human being, not with necessarily validating or confirming their beliefs, but with if we want to learn something about each other, if we want to, figure out the why behind everyone's philosophy, so that we can have more information for moving forward together. I think that curiosity is important. But I would say at Plan C, for the last 7 years, we've been pretty clear that we're just going to keep going in the direction of access, well-being, sharing information, expanding access to this method that's going to ultimately help people. We don't spend too much time getting in the mud to argue and go back and forth. We're more, it's a very kind of public health PSA style information campaign of like, we're not expecting to change any minds. We do think it's really important that we inform everyone, not just the people who are already confirmed, pro-abortion activists or whatever. We think it's important that we reach harder to reach communities, that we reach groups that might traditionally have views that restrict abortion. We think that we know from the hotlines and the data that there's people coming in and calling in from all sorts of different religious and cultural backgrounds, saying, I didn't ever think that this would be me, but here I am, I need an abortion, and so that's really important to hold with compassion and with no stigma. We talk a lot at Plan C about destigmatization. That includes not stigmatizing or critiquing someone who's coming in or calling in to get an abortion who never thought they would. And this is just part of the expansion of this concept and the kind of making sure it's in front of as many people as possible, to get through, to kind of cut through the noise and reach people who might not even know that they are existing within a particular framework of the world that has limitations, or that is going to be a barrier for their well-being or their future.
A very similar answer. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I was so drawn to Women on Web and why I so admire groups like Plan C is that while that discussion is happening somewhere else, people are still getting pregnant and need help. And so that's why this action was so appealing to me, what they were doing. And it's sort of another thought I had about misconceptions is that, from an activist perspective, you don't have to be on the defensive with this issue. And when you see groups that are working from, on the offensive and actually coming up with creative and innovative and action-driven routes to work within this issue, it's so inspiring.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you're pointing directly to the piece around that 40 million men who are pro-choice, who believe that women should have autonomy over their bodies, are not in this fight. And that would directly change the whole calculus of this fight in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean that we need to lead or be at the front of this discussion, but I think directly in support, directly alongside is necessary. One of the things that we're battling is as an organization at Merge is this idea of not trying to lead. And running into our own toxic masculinity, our own patriarchy, and thinking about not wanting to put the brunt or the labor of answering what does men's role in this work look like. How do you see that? How do you see that conversation? Do you see it as a helpful one? Do you think it's a way for men to continue to be on the sidelines and not engage because we're trying to figure out where we actually do, and it's more important for us to just get in? What are your thoughts around that? And yeah, go ahead. I'll
Yeah, I can start with that. Well, I think what's coming up for me as you describe that grappling, that maybe conflicted feeling of trying to figure out how to show up, perhaps there is something masculine about like wanting to, lead, wanting to like have a singular focus and go for it and accomplish it, and maybe perhaps there's a more feminine approach that is more integrated, that is kind of trying to connect the dots and see things as a whole and take care of the whole. And so I think that, we talked briefly before this call, I think that there have been a lot of barriers to entry for men, for male identified folks in this, or people without capacity for pregnancy in this movement, because it hasn't been clear what is needed, what is wanted. It maybe hasn't always been welcoming. Yeah, there's not a need perhaps for men to take the lead if they're not the ones getting the abortions. But there is a massive opportunity for men to join the conversation, for men to be sharing information, amplifying what's going on, helping the funds get funded, helping the indie clinics get funded, helping the online resources and the access to pills get funded, sharing their stories. I sat down with a man a week. Time is very stretchy right now. A week and a half ago at a conference, and we, naturally pretty quickly got to like the "what do you do" question, and I pulled out Plan C stickers. I have them around here somewhere. I'll pull them out. Pulled out my Plan C sticker and said, "Oh, this is I help run this campaign. It's about abortion pill access in all states. People do things like spread these stickers around." And he went, "Oh my God, I love that. That's so cool. Thank you for doing that work." And he said, "An abortion changed my life. When I was 16, my girlfriend was able to have an abortion, and I'm confident that that changed the trajectory of my life. Like if she hadn't, I would have had a kid at 16. I would have had to go find a job. I would have had to be a family man immediately. It would have absolutely derailed what I thought I had planned for my life." And I really appreciated him sharing that story. And we talked after that about the opportunity for partners, for men, for, the other party, perhaps the sperm donor of the party, to be talking. And it's not always appropriate. It's not always necessary. And I know that it can be tricky. I've been thinking this past couple weeks about what I'm recognizing as tricky is that in this country, we're also having really open conversations about sexual assault, about power, and like the Me Too movement. And what I was recognizing was that, some men might not be comfortable sharing their stories about an abortion affecting their life because it brings up into the public view their sex life, their past encounters. Who knows? Like I started to really recognize, there's probably so many layers there. A man, especially a person with like a lot of public, that's very publicly known, probably has to move through a lot of different questions about how's the public going to receive this. And I think there are so many people, there's so much opportunity to just be sharing more stories if it feels safe, if it feels brave, if it feels like something that a person is ready to share, I think those stories can be really transformative, because that's the reality of abortion. You know, you've probably seen those t-shirts. Everyone knows someone who's had an abortion.
Yeah.
You know, the stat in the US is 1 in 4 people of reproductive capacity have had an abortion by age 45. We actually think it's much more than that. That's not including things that aren't being classified as abortions. It's not, medical classification is all over the place in this realm. That's a different conversation for a different time. But a lot of things that are technically abortions within the medical system or outside of the medical system are not being counted as abortions. It's probably closer to 1 in 2. And that's just a theory. That's just kind of, again, like a thought exploration, but it's just so intimately woven into our lives and into people's health journeys and people's reproductive journeys. And I think the more that we are talking about it just as something normal and essential, and not over here in this quiet, private, scary camp that we don't talk about, you know, the more that it's just like, yeah, we're talking about it. That's, I think this, if there is a silver lining to the whole mess of a political landscape and the fall of Roe and all of that, I think it's that now we are talking about it. It's cracked wide open, and we're again grappling with it, because now we have to, and now we get to decide, how much do we prioritize this? How much do we believe that this needs to be wrapped into healthcare and rights and equity and well-being? And if we believe that, then let's, you know, put our voting, put our money, put our actions where our mouth is, and really strive for it. So I think, yeah, there's a few ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the way I quickly got introduced to the reproductive justice fight started when I was 7, when my mom told me that she had an abortion, and that she also did actions to counterbalance Operation Push, and was a counter protester at abortion clinics in Chicago. And so I think once what you're naming is, once now we're talking about it, we can deliver funds, we can deliver research. I mean, there's a whole other discussion around maternity morbidity and infant mortality all over the world, but especially in this country, and seeing it decline, seeing it increase, and seeing the amount of people, you know, our ability to have good healthcare access decline. Dana, I'll pass it to you on kind of thoughts around men's grappling with this issue. And yeah, thanks for taking the question.
I mean, I agree with everything Amy said. I think, you know, after I released Vessel, I was impressed, surprised at the number of men who came up to me after screenings and wanted to share their stories with me, and just the idea of normalizing it is step one. I mean, that's something everyone can do, because everyone, like Amy was saying, 1 in 3, 1 in 2, 1 in 4, whatever whatever the actual numbers are, everyone knows someone and has some direct experience or indirect experience. So, you know, as a storyteller, stories normalize, and by telling your own story, that helps to normalize and allows the comfort level to rise around the subject. And so yeah, I just think that's step one, and I agree with you that there is a certain amount of emotional labor that goes into answering this question. And, you know, like being an ally to any movement, you know, figuring out your skill set and how you can contribute, and listening so that you can pivot when you get it wrong. And yeah.
I think one of the big things that we try to do at Merge when new men join is meeting them where they are, right? It's not about coercing them immediately, because there's something that happens inside your body that's like, whoa, why am I trying to get dragged somewhere or pulled somewhere? And I think that as an activist and a social justice worker, you know, it's important to be always meeting people with their kind of direct experience. Shifting gears just a little bit, I would love for you all to kind of, or maybe this is more of a conversation or a question for Amy, but like, can you give me the process by someone reaching out to Plan C all the way to them taking it? Taking the pills and getting the pills, yes.
Sure.
I mean,
So,
I'm sure it's varied as well.
well, I'm thinking how I want to start is by clarifying that we're not a provider or a shipper of pills. We're an information resource and a creative campaign. So when someone finds us, which these days they might find us through social media, through a partner organization in a restricted state that is making information available, through our Know Your Plan C campaign, which is at knowyourplanc.com, which is focused on 6 particular restricted states and sharing out information with paid social media and video ads. They might do a Google search and we might come up, although we're not allowed to advertise on Google Ads for about 16 months now. So they wouldn't see a fancy ad. Very ironic because Google is still happy to take the money of crisis pregnancy centers and groups that don't actually offer abortion, but advertise under abortion keywords. But they've blocked Plan C for us listing all of the various alternate routes on our guide to pills. So when someone finds us as a resource, they would come to our website. I encourage you to check it out if you're curious, plancpills.org, and you would find a state-by-state finder. You would enter the state that you're looking for options within, and you would see that there's a couple different options. One of the routes of access that I want to highlight is really new, and in a state like, let's say, Kansas, you would see that US-based provider telehealth is possible. And you might ask, how in the world is that possible? All I hear about is abortion bans and about providers no longer being able to offer care, about clinics having to close, all of these things. And it's that now there are 6 states with shield laws in place that protect providers as they do telehealth across state lines and mail pills into states with restrictions. So it's pretty amazing. This is never, I don't know that this has ever been done before, that telehealth has been sort of re-examined for the arbitrariness of the borders in this case, and that the human rights need has been centered in these policy changes. So now there are a handful of telehealth providers who are practicing under shield laws. They're essentially testing the laws. They're serving thousands of patients a month. And so you might see this as an option in the guide. Alongside other options would be websites that sell pills, which are these e-commerce sites where you can order the pills for as low as $47 now. That's the lowest price package. That's also kind of remarkable because traditionally medication abortion has been priced similarly to surgical or aspiration abortion. That average price in the US is like $5 something or $600. So pills being available by mail for $47 is pretty, it matters to some people. That's how they're making the decision, is by cost. You'll also see community-based networks. These are groups like Las Libres in Mexico and a group like Red State Access in the States that is staffed by volunteers who are mailing pills in restricted states. And so that is also sort of just something that popped up after Roe. And you'll see context there, you'll see FAQs, you'll see, again, alerts about knowing your legal risk, knowing that there are resources out there to help you, knowing that there's medical peer support and legal hotlines that you can always hop on the phone and speak to. And then you would choose your option, go through the process of ordering the pills, do intake if you're doing telehealth, put in your information. Again, these days there's security recommendations around how you're inputting your information and what kind of a browser you're using, what kind of an email address you're using. Groups like Digital Defense Fund and Electronic Frontier Foundation are 2 good resources for someone to know their digital safety and make decisions accordingly. And then you would finish off that process with making your payment. Most of the fund, so one note on that is that traditionally in this country, there's been a network of abortion funds that have been working in tandem with the network of indie clinics and other types of clinics. And those funds are not yet, a lot of those funds are not yet equipped or working with the shield law providers or with the online access to pills. And so the way that it's working right now is that the telehealth providers are mostly offering sliding scale. So someone would go through the process and along the way, they would say, I need sliding scale cost. And then they would get the cost down to what they could afford. Most of those providers will drop it all the way down to 0 if needed. Aid Access, Rebecca Gombert's organization, also drops it down to 0. So that's how the funding factors into the picture. And then the pills will come in a number of days. Again, these days, if it's within the US, it's going to be like 3 to 5 days, which is a huge difference from, say, the 3 weeks that was happening during the pandemic when flights were down, when commerce was at a standstill. Aid Access was still trying to get services into the US, but it was taking 2 to 3 weeks for people to get their pills. And as you can imagine, that's really stressful. It causes people a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of unknowns there. So that's the process through the Plan C Pills Guide. And the final piece I want to mention is that we also know that people are ordering pills in advance these days to just have on hand just in case. And in our guide, we list the providers and services that offer pills in advance. And anyone with capacity for pregnancy can go through that process and, again, do the intake and request the pills. And the deal there is that the provider will basically tell you if and when you need to use this method. Here's the instructions, but also you can always get back in touch with us. And so the cost of that service, we feel the cost is a little high. It's often $150 or $200 to get the pills, which is a lot to spend if it's something that's just like a, backup plan. And my understanding is that that cost is wrapping in any provider-driven care or support if and when the person uses the pills, that they would just call that service back and get the support they need to do a medication abortion at home.
Amy, I really appreciate you going through that step by step, just because I think hearing it more with so much clarity is an allowance for so many men who can rewatch this film or this recordings, particularly about how they can get involved, right? Or was it at this point? Is it at this point? Is it at this point? Whether it's your engineering, whether it's being a dietitian, or all these things are an opportunity for men to say, oh, wait, I could potentially have an impact at that particular juncture in that space. Diana, when you first started to make the film Vessel, or in the beginning of the film, it was just a boat, and then it transitioned. And correct me if I'm wrong. Then it transitioned to recognizing that the need was so much larger than what potentially could be provided on a boat. And then Rebecca created Women on Web. What was the kind of emotional space or the discussion amongst people as you were filming about this maybe shift or transition?
Oh, okay. Well, to be transparent about that, the footage from the first half of the film was donated to me. So I came on board and started filming in the Ecuador campaign. And the shift happened for Women on Waves in the previous campaign, which was in Portugal. So I wasn't there for it. What I know from the footage and from knowing these people is that, yes, the idea had initially been conceived of as a clinic on a ship that would help everyone who got to the ship. And very quickly, because of all kinds of restrictions, that became less feasible, and it became more symbolic and a means to communicate the idea of this hotline. But what happened in Portugal is that Rebecca, who was pregnant at the time, and you referenced this scene earlier, went on live television. And this was actually not a communal decision at the time. There was definitely people who were, Rebecca shoots from the hip. And that's what makes her exciting and a real button pusher, and someone who can move the needle as much as she has. And so, yeah, she went on live television in Portugal and ambushed them with the protocols of how to take the pills. And I think that moment, that was a big shift, because they realized that they could just publicize this information. And yes, it took a lot of legal manipulation and maneuvering in order to protect themselves while they did it. But the idea was born, that just to share this information. And it wasn't born with, I mean, she wasn't the first person to do it. This is, women in Latin America were doing this, for years prior, when they just first discovered that this pill that was an anti-ulcer medication, it had a little piece of instruction on the label that said, a counterindication that said, don't take this if you're pregnant. And they said, oh, I don't want to be pregnant. I'm going to take this and see what happens. And that led to that was the general history behind how these pills came to be, the abortion pill. So people were already spreading this information by all kinds of whisper networks and, women's groups and whatnot. But yes, to go big with mass media happened in that moment for them.
So I think what's right, like that story illustrates kind of why we wanted to title this Access with Action, right? That you're kind of in a moment in which you can transition or transform a space into one that is an activist space, or one that potentially could lead to a lot more people getting abortion access. And so we as a group at Merge decided to start a reading group because obviously we are always trying to continue to learn about reproductive justice. And we chose a book called Undivided Rights, which was published many, many years ago. Loretta Ross is a contributing author. And it's a lot about how abortion access and the reproductive justice movement is different for Black and brown women, specifically, or Black and brown birthing people. And so I would love for both of you to kind of share or talk about what does it mean to center the most marginalized, whether it's people on who are experiencing poverty, people who are trans, what the people who are some of the most marginalized in our society. What does it mean to center them in this process as you are pushing for larger access?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It reminds me, you know, when you were asking about what can men do, it reminds me of that question of like leadership and of where the information needs to come from, how does information flow, and who gets to decide. And I would say that from the beginning, Plan C has worked really hard to operate under some core values, and in those core values includes equity and justice, and really always trying to center the end user who needs the pills, and make sure that we are focusing on people with the highest barriers to access, right? Like our focus is not a state like California where telehealth is happening and abortion is, you know, not always readily available depending on a person's situation, but that there is so much more access. And the focus of a campaign like Know Your Plan C is on 6 states with restricted access, communities with immense barriers to access, and really trying to spread information and make sure that groups, that communities, individuals in those states know that this might be an option for them. And to do that, again, it's really about learning from the grassroots groups on the ground. It's about having conversations. It's about forming partnerships and building trust. It's about understanding people's concerns or questions, or what do they need to know to make a decision about even sharing information, right? Again, back to the legality and back to the mess that is our current landscape of abortion access and our patchwork quilt of abortion bans across this country. It's really people in each state are trying to determine what is their particular situation, and then how does that relate to access to pills by mail, and how do they want to think about sharing information within their own state. The aiding and abetting laws has thrown a whole other wrench into people's organizations and processes, because that creates a whole new level of risk and fear and confusion about, can we even share information anymore? But really, again and again, we keep coming back to the way that we think about, as you said, centering folks, centering members of marginalized communities and people experiencing higher barriers to access, is really by working with and building upon relationships with people of those identities and groups that are in service of those groups in service of people of those identities, and just making sure that we're factoring in as many of the considerations and needs as we can, as we design information, as we design campaigns, as we do updates to our website. And Loretta Ross actually has a quote in the Plan C documentary. If you go see the film, you'll see that the thing that she says is that we need to be blanketing those states with information, and that information is going to be the way. People don't know about their rights if or people can't have rights if they don't know that they have them. They have to know what's available to them. They have to know that they have basic rights, and then they can start to take actions that will be in service of their needs and their well-being. So yeah, I guess my final, if that feels a little too nebulous, or I'd be happy to get more specific. But yeah, really, in terms of because we get the question a lot of how do you reach the harder to reach individuals and communities, and again, really that comes down to learning from the organizations on the ground on how they typically get information out to their communities. It's about learning about how something like radio ads or pod ads might reach folks. So we do run radio and pod ads right now, as well as running paid social media ads. We do pop up at community events if we're invited in by a local group, and we can have a table there and we can share Plan C stickers and flyers alongside of the other groups that are showing up in service of those communities. We're there. We love being a part of IRL events also, because it provides that opportunity to have a quick conversation. And yeah, we continue to learn from the research also of how people get their information these days, what kind of technology they do or do not have access to, and baseline whether or not people even know about this option. And there's still a lot of data out there that shows that at least half the country doesn't know about abortion pills, probably more like 3/4 don't really know about abortion pills. So we have our work cut out for us. But again, we do it with a lot of sensitivity and care, and operate with a lot of integrity within our team and its values.
Before you jump in, Diana, I just want to say, like, that was one of the most pivotal parts about the book of Undivided Rights. And this was 15 years ago, before the kind of the explosion of social media. But just for Asian immigrant women, especially on the West Coast, just not lumping all Asian women into Chinese or to Japanese was critical, just for them to get the actual information. People who have it, so taking that information and translating it into 5, 10, 25 different languages was actually a huge route for so many more women of that identity to access reproductive justice. And so making sure that we're not lumping everyone into the same pot of like, okay, well, now you're all X, so you might get your information this way. Dinah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we had an outreach campaign around the film. When you make a documentary, you're expected, especially if you're in the social justice realm, to sort of build an outreach campaign around it with, ways to participate. And our whole drive was not to reinvent the wheel. It was to outreach in terms of making the film available to as many partner organizations as we could find, but then to let them lead the activism around those events, the screenings. So the film was again, a conversation starter. It was inspiration, and then take that energy that screenings of the film can generate, and let the local organizations that were hosting the screenings mobilize that energy towards their own goal. So that's always been, critical to our intentions.
I will ask one more question, then I'll open it up to the audience. And we've touched on this before, but I guess thinking about what men can do specifically, or just people who are in this fight, but I guess for Merge's purposes, I ended the questions that I sent to you thinking about what does support look like. And I think there has to be on-ramps and access ramps for men to get involved at different capacity levels. One of the things that we first started doing at Merge was thinking about, like, how do you want to engage with us? Is it at a level 0? Is it a level 4? If it's just hearing our news, if it's just reading our newsletter, great. If it's going to become a abortion clinic escort, great. And we can kind of push you into different avenues. What would you both say about, like, what's the kernel, like maybe the smallest, easiest access point for people to get engaged? I for some odd reason, I'm using a farming metaphor here, but what's the corn, which may take a little bit longer to harvest and maybe be more significant in the long term? And then what's kind of the corn field? What's the lifelong work around reproductive justice or abortion access at large?
Amy, I'm going to defer to you on this, because you're working more actively with it right now.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to answer that. We did some work with a couple of male advisors and allies a few years ago to develop some sample social media messaging. I'll just start there, because I would start normally with, anyone can share information. Again, if they feel safe and ready to do so, they can, hop online and share information about Plan C and all of its ecosystem of self-managed resources. One framing that we played around with a year and a half, 2 years ago, was this idea of, I just learned that abortion pills are safe and effective and that they're available by mail in any state. Like, that felt comfortable to the guys I was working with, instead of coming online and saying, I'm an expert, let me tell you all about pills and all about abortion and all about, the, again, complex landscape in this country. You can just say, hey, I just learned something and I'm posting it because I think people might be interested. And I think, the other people and men in my life might be interested too. And so that I would offer as a potential framing for sharing information. We also have those Plan C stickers available on our website. Let me see if I have easy access to them. Of course, when I need them, they're tucked away. But you can order stickers and put them up in your community on places. You decide where you want to put stickers. I'm not going to tell you where to put them. And you can also join the Plan C community. We do have an online community. There's a Discord chat board, and you can join in and follow the recent news and hear about what actions are taking place in cities across the country and online. And again, join in that way. That is kind of the tiered approach that Justin was describing. That organization I mentioned, Shout Your Abortion, is also a very active way to get involved. They take more of a radical approach. You'll see in their messaging, their messages are more like Ep SCOTUS, we're doing it anyway, or their most recent is laws aren't real. They are just, really pushing the edge of, again, how we think about abortion and how we operate in this country, whether we think that the court system is even legit anymore. And so anyway, if that is a tone that appeals, that's a great organization to check out. I think more specifically in sharing information, you could share that I just learned that, not only are pills available by mail in all states, but that people are getting pills in advance. That's a vision that we have, that pills would just be blanketing the country. People would just have them in their medicine cabinets like you would have other medications. And again, this medication is extremely safe. It's considered safer than Tylenol, safer than Viagra. Again, there are pieces of information that someone needs to know in order to use the medication, but all of that is very readily available. So the more pills that are in people's drawers and cabinets, the better. And I also think there's a real opportunity right now for companies, brands, other organizations to get involved by, again, just speaking up, just speaking about what they're learning about abortion access, about the kinds of rights that we demand, that we deserve. It no longer needs to be just a repro push. It really is time. And I especially think about the brands and companies that committed after Dobbs to protecting abortion access at all costs. Like, my cynical side is like, where are they now? What are people doing? And do they know? Like, again, to lead with curiosity and think, do people know all that's happening? All you see in the news is the next awful ban that is being passed and how people are being harmed. And, a lot of the media spin is around the very real harmful effects of the bans. And then there's this whole other world opening up. Again, not as a panacea, not to just solve it overnight, but that there's this expansion happening in other areas where people really are getting what they need. And so that would be an opportunity to perhaps talk to companies and brands that you're affiliated with to just have a conversation about what's their readiness, I would say, not even comfort level, but like, what's their readiness to participate, to be sharing information, to be having these conversations. I'm heading off to Advertising Week in New York next week, and to speak on a panel. And what I've noticed is that the way that these kinds of corporate conferences want to include reproductive justice right now, they know they should be, but they're generalizing, but like, they can be pretty skittish about it. And the panels that I've been sitting on have to do with why women's health matters in the workplace, which makes my eyes roll all the way back in my head. But also, again, if it's the way that I'm going to get in the door and talk about pills by mail, then so be it. And so I would love to see these conversations happening at all conferences. It's a real intersection. It's like, we're talking about rights and access. We're talking about like we're talking about culture wars or cultural kind of fluxes that are happening. We're talking about innovations. We're talking about people getting creative to make sure that people have what they need. It's just all sorts of dimensions to the issue that could be brought before the public, that could be incorporated into conferences. So that's a more, again, kind of abstract idea, but planting the seed there. And then finally, donating or raising money. All these groups need funding. The groups that are on the front lines, that, you know, the indie clinics and the funds that have been at this for decades, they still need funding. They're still helping. They're still, most of them, you know, active in some way. And then the new services, the telehealth providers that are doing shield law provision, they also need funding. They're doing sliding scale, often out of their own pockets. There's no consistent source of funding for these services. So the one fund that I know of for sure that is funding shield law provision is Abortion Freedom Fund. That's abortionfreedomfund.org. They're a great one to donate to. They are specifically funding the new shield law provision. And WRAP is another good fund. WRRAP.org is a national fund that has also been funding aid access providers and, again, taking kind of a future-facing look at what is going to need funding on ongoing, and funding indie clinics too. There's a great network that where you can fund indie clinics, and again, make sure that those organizations continue to get support and help people who need, especially in-person care.
Diana, one of the quick questions I had for you, just because I know I was like, this is my last question, but just adding to this space, because I think what the film did was really expand the idea of abortion access to the whole world, right? For people who are so US centric, they can only focus on what's going on in the United States. Do you think that, I'm sure all of the things that Amy just mentioned applies internationally. Is there other things that we can be considering in the international context?
Yes, I don't have them all at my fingertips, you know, at the ready. I'm a little bit removed from that at the moment, but if you go to any of the, you know, the hubs and start doing that research, you'll find those links. I guess in general, just to reiterate your point, which is I'm just thinking of this one experience I had filming a training session in the Philippines. It was a convention at a hotel in the Philippines, and the Women on Web folks were doing a training in the hotel room upstairs. It was very small and very quiet, and the idea, what I thought I was about to be filming, was a group of volunteers, providers, doctors, activists, learning how to do these protocols so that they could then go forth and continue to provide. And what I was set straight in that moment is that they already knew the protocols, you know, down to the letter. They knew exactly what they were doing, but what they needed was the solidarity of connection to other people doing the same work, because they were working in such isolation. So yes, this is happening everywhere. Yes, it has been for many, many years. And the idea of connecting, you know, everyone doing it is something that I think is getting elevated right now in a very positive way.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful parts about the whole film was seeing the trainers from Ecuador, training people from Brazil, training people from Venezuela, training people from Chile and Argentina. It was just like you could see the snowball start to really go, and it was filling. It was just it was really, really powerful. All right,
because the information is pretty simple.
Yes.
You know, you can share that information.
Yes. Okay, enough of me sharing. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I will want to open up to anyone in the audience. If you want to raise your hand, I can call on you if you'd like, or you can unmute and jump in. If there's a burning question, please ask. I'm an educator and I have great wait time, so we will be here for anybody willing to jump in here.
I have a question. It's as I'm also an educator and I'm also on the leadership team of Merge, and I'm very inspired by this conversation. Thank you both so much. So Diana, you've used obviously the medium of film to communicate messages that might not otherwise be meant to be either accessible. Well, they're accessible, but maybe they're a tiny bit harder to find. And Amy, you've used all your work with web design and the organizations that you work with, and print media and stickers and such like. Do you see? Have you seen? Are you aware of any work specifically in the field of music related to reproductive justice, related to access, related to, and yes, ideally like one step past like rally chants, which are awesome. But as a music teacher, I'm leading my sixth graders through a protest song project. So this is both a selfish question and a question to learn more about what is out there in the landscape.
Yeah, great question. Well, as a musician, Russell, I know you already mentioned my music background, and I got a chance to be on a listening call for Demi Lovato's new abortion song earlier this year. I'll put in the chat. Demi Lovato wrote a song called Swine that is a very fired up, angry protest kind of rock anthem. And they brought 6 or 7 of us on a listening call to basically say, and I really appreciated this too. They said, will you listen to the song and tell us if there's anything in this lyric or music that's gonna like offend people or like be wrong? Does this all sound like correct? And it's art, so she's taking her own approach to it, which is like gonna blast it out there. But we all kind of listened and went, sounds like her, and it sounds like she got the facts right and is taking a stance. And so Plan C was one of the 3 partners for the release of the song. And yeah, I was thrilled at how that all went. I think that it reached a lot of people that we wouldn't have normally reached. We were in, Rolling Stone and all these publications that normally wouldn't just write about an abortion resource. And that I truly believe that art's always going to be essential because it is reaching people by opening hearts and minds and by shifting, perspective in a totally different, maybe kind of somatic way or experiential way that has nothing to do with the stats and figures and the politics, right? It's so essential. And that's why I do my creative project, my post-apocalyptic futurist band, is that it is an experiment in letting go of everything that I hold so tightly to for my own politics, my own identity, and getting to float around in what is it that I actually dream of? Like, what is that world that I seek? What does it feel like? We can barely even make space for that in our everyday lives right now because we're so busy defending ourselves. So I'm all for it. I will always be a musician as well as an activist and a creative because I just think that art is going to save us, can I say? Art will save us. So yeah, Russell, I'll think if there's any other music examples and I'll send them to you.
I have a sort of out there response to that. This morning in the New York Times, there was a little blurb about how Devo used to do advertising, and it was something like for 30 years he was doing these like advertising blurbs, and the example they gave was he did one for Hawaiian Punch, and he subversively wove in the sentence, "Sugar is bad for you." Like, it just made me laugh in terms of like how you can work this stuff literally, or like you're saying much more poetically, Amy, in a broader sense, but that reminded me of that.
That's amazing.
Sorry about that. George, I see your hand. Do you want to ask your question?
I've got several part question relating to myself. One is in working with Merge and getting resources on the website. I discovered, and I think several of us discovered, several resources which were totally phony and or completely the opposite side. And the other part I would say to this is, as a clinic escort with Planned Parenthood, I encounter these protesters who I never respond to, pushing these good clinics, and I'm obviously, some of them are completely phony clinics and don't do anything with their fake sonograms and with no medical thing. And I guess the question I have is, one is, how do we how do we discern real from unreal in the media and resources? And how do we counter the messages and the stuff of like, yeah, you don't want to have an abortion, so you don't need to go to Planned Parenthood. You can go to so and so, which is a good clinic where they're going to get propagandized, obviously.
So you're asking like what are the resources that exist for people to filter through the misinformation, or
Well, both how can we discern stuff that is misinformation, as well as one of the things that really upsets me is women who are going into the clinic, who are going back to protesters, talking back to them and saying, I'm not going there for an abortion. I'm only going there for a pap smear or this or that or the other thing. Like there's something wrong with it. And there's this push to say you don't have to go to Planned Parenthood and try to split off abortion from women's health care, as well as just the same abortion itself. And I'm just asking about both phony resources and good ways to counter the messaging that is put out against these women. In the specific situation I'm seeing, it's a lot Latina women.
Gosh, I mean, so many things come to mind. I think in terms of how can we ensure people are getting accurate information, I still do think it's about amplifying core resources, amplifying these resources that are vetted, evidence-based, trusted, so that at least if someone's on an information journey, they're going to be clicking through the kind of trusted resources that will bring them to real services. So besides the Plancy guide obviously has a focus on pills by mail, but also clicks off to other directories like ineedan.com and abortionfinder.org. If someone's going through those directories, they're going to find real clinics. They're not going to land in a crisis pregnancy center. So it really is, ideally about amplifying those. I want to have a whole conversation about SEO and what's going on there, but we don't have time for that. So it's it's got to be about highlighting these trusted resources. And there's also there's a website where you can, I can't remember what it's called right now. I can follow up with it, but it's like, is this clinic real? It's like a test. It's a form field where you can put in the clinic and see if this is a clinic that actually offers abortion. And then in terms of your question about like, how do we help people feel like they can, that everything that they're there for is okay, that, they don't have to be clarifying that they're not getting an abortion. That to me is just this longer cultural arc that we're on. Again, it's about destigmatization, and every person's going to have that. Every person's going to have their own relationship to the term abortion, to the concept of abortion. And if they are on a journey of changing that, rewiring that, whatever it is, and accepting it, then that's just going to take them however much time it takes them. So I don't know that you can like, I think that if someone feels as they're crossing the picket line that they need to say, I'm not having an abortion, then that's just where they're at on their journey. And hopefully by being in supportive, loving environments, then they can slowly over time realize, oh, that doesn't even matter. I can have an abortion if I want. Everyone's having, people all around me are having abortions. I think that is a longer kind of, again, cultural arc that we're on, this expansive conversation around abortion and destigmatizing and normalizing it. Also, that reminds me, my final point here is that the Shout Your Abortion group just put up a series of billboards on I-55 in the Midwest, which are just loving statements. They're saying things like, God's plan includes abortion, or, we love, like basically all these statements about we love you and you're not doing anything wrong. And even if you're a spiritual person, you don't have to think about this as doing something wrong. Like it's getting a lot of press, both on the progressive news media side and even from places like Fox News, because it's such a, it's kind of a new edge. I haven't seen billboards like that before, even though I've seen plenty of crisis pregnancy center billboards and anti-abortion billboards. So again, I think it's the more that we can do to push through these destigmatizing kind of cultural campaigns and new messages, I think people will get to internalize that for themselves and relax into knowing that all of these options can be okay for them.
I think especially in terms of, I mean, just me answering the George's question in some ways is around moving at the speed of trust and making sure that you work methodically and intentionally and not rush. And I think as men who are wanting to support these situations, we cannot rush and we cannot be impatient. We understand, we're growing to understand the gravity of the situation, but that does not mean that we find a quick link and send it to this person because of exactly what you said around the SEO and so forth. So really thinking about what is movement like, even if it's not as fast as you would want it, but really being like the actual best information or the best access is going to come from maybe a pace that's not the fastest. Diana, did you want to jump in to answer George's question?
No, that's great. Yeah, good.
We maybe have chance for one more question. We have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to send a couple of shout outs at the end. Anybody with one more question? Will or Grace?
Hey, thank you so much for this. It's been really amazing, and we've been listening in as we chase our dog. I'm just curious, going toward the little bit of the artistic question, but what is like the out there 50-year future, recognizing, Roe versus Wade celebrated like a milestone. I try to think about like time and like a long view. And so I'm curious, like, what is your hope from your all's work and your artistic expression in like 25 years, 50 years? What is the conversation we were having? What's the environment we're having and we're trying to work towards? If you had to think about, like, if you had to imagine in your own creative ways what we're building towards. So I just thought that would be a cool thing to.
Yeah, love that question. Thank you. What comes to mind is that the way that people have been talking about this Dobbs moment, this fall of Roe, is that it for some felt very sudden, but it was a long arc of a strategy, right? From the anti-abortion side to put the judges into place, to put things into place so that that could be overturned. The bad news is that it's not probably going to flip anytime soon, right? We're kind of in it for a moment, and this whole legal thing has to play out, and states are doing what they do, and it's just going to be a minute. And that's why at Plan C, we really believe these things have to operate in tandem. We have to keep pushing for better policies and protections. We also have to just know how to get people abortions right now in the moment. And so that's what's happening. And I hope for, I want and work toward more alignment even within the movement, to have more of a shared vision, to make sure groups are getting their needs met, and then we're all, working towards similar aims. What that vision is, I would say, the one other piece of information is that there are so many other countries where abortion is illegal, banned in different ways, deeply stigmatized. We have a lot to learn, as Diana said, from the global landscape and from what other countries have done to overcome bans for many, many years. Like Poland, banned abortion. The Poland activists are amazing. They are really loud. They're giving people pills and getting arrested for it and going through processes, which, again, no one wishes that on anyone. You don't want that to happen, but they're being very, very straightforward about what they believe in, what their values are, and how they're going to keep helping people no matter what, regardless of legality. So I think we have a lot to learn from other countries that have been doing this for a long time. Mexico has had a 20-year network of peer-to-peer abortion support. They just finally decriminalized abortion because I think the Mexican government looked at it and went, whoops, that's totally out of our hands. I guess we should just decriminalize it because it's happening anyway. So I really think if we can reorient here in the US from perhaps a previous perspective that was like, individuals need abortions, we need to help every individual get their abortion and have these patchwork systems that don't really work together, but everyone's sort of making it work. I think if we can reorient toward collective action, and that the vision that we're reorienting toward is that everyone gets to have the kind of abortion they want, they seek. Again, it's going to look really different. It's not going to look like it did even 5 years ago. Everything is changing, but I think that the technology is there, the mail is there, the ordering is possible, the systems of support are already in place. And then, again, kind of reinforcing and supporting these clinics, these providers that are able to still offer services, and reinforce enough travel and logistics support so that people can move if they need and want to. I think there is a functional system. And we try to describe that for people. Again, we don't want to like leave anyone out, but we want to do a better job at describing that vision so that organizations, individuals, artists, groups can figure out how they want to participate. And I think that vision really is, like people getting the abortions that they seek and need, and that we can kind of like just prove our point that bans don't work and that they cause more harm than good. But it is a long arc, and I think we need it. Obviously, it can't be just me describing it either. Obviously, we need leadership from, like we discussed earlier, folks experiencing the largest barriers to access. We need leadership from the folks on the ground who are working with the communities who are experiencing these barriers. And then we need artists to sort of maybe free themselves from the practical and logistical so that they can, work with those folks to describe what that future potential is. But let's do it. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
I would just add, from the storytelling perspective, I'm in communities of people that make these stories, that make our television and our films. And there's a big push right now to normalize these stories through these media channels. And I think that is something that I want to see, that the ubiquity of abortion in real life is reflected in the stories that we feed on and that feed us. And I think that's, and the reason for that is not only just because it's true, but because when it's that normalized, there's a much more nuanced conversation that's possible around it, instead of this fiercely held territory on either sides of a polarized issue. So yeah, stories.
That's critical that you mentioned that, because I think as men join Merge, depending on your identities, those stories shift and change, and the stigma, as Amy was mentioning, shifts as well. And so how do we destigmatize? Amy and Diana, thank you so much for a lively, really profound conversation. I feel like I'm that much more full an hour and a half later. I just want to shout out Russell, one of the other co-founders, who really did a great job in the chat of pushing forward the websites and all of the information that Amy and Diana were speaking about. Thank you, George, for sharing your opening. It is definitely on our hearts and minds, so thank you so much. If you'd like to stay on for a couple more minutes, you're welcome to, but I know that time is precious. And I just want to say so much thank you again. So much gratefulness. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. And I am going to put on a Formerly Alien track at Russell's request. The song is called 21st Century, and it feels appropriate. But keep talking. I'll just have it on, and I think you'll still be able to chat if you want to.
I am going to sign off. I'm going to move on with my day, but it's been really great to talk with you all. And good luck.
Thank you, Diana. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Close your eyes. Tell me how you feel inside. Well, it won't hurt one bit if you just roll with it. Don't be shy. We can stop it any time. And when the big one hits, we got a plan for it. We got a plan for it. Brave daughters and sons of the light, we're taking over. Run with us tonight. Playing God is more than a game to me. I was born in the 20th the place, staring down the future of the whole human race. And if you want, you can pray for some final hour.
Sharing
You can make
your music
some
with us.
change.
I would mention that we're just down now. All of us.
Brave daughters assemble tonight. We're taking over. Put your hands up high. Playing cards just like a game to me. I was born in the 21st century. Change comes when you open your minds. We're taking over, running out of time to raise up. Maybe we're made to be born in the 21st century.
This has been a test. In the event of an actual emergency, this message would be followed by specific instructions.
Wow. Thanks, guys. Thanks for
Love it,
honoring
love it. Oh, that's
my music.
fantastic.
That's really meaningful.
Oh, that was phenomenal.
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing real briefly, and that is, I'm disappointed in the attendance. I also would note I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, for my 50th university reunion, and I have a not first but cousin here who was signed up for the call, and she's Israeli American, and she's traumatized by what's going on. She's supportive of Palestinian people, particularly, and she's a journalist, and she was going to be here. There's a protest that started 40 minutes ago, and she's really traumatized. She would have been here except for the stuff going on. And I'm sure that she's not the only one on whichever side they view what's going on with Gaza.
We are super.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
Sorry,
time.
go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for George. I'm sure she was right where she needed to be, and I'm glad we recorded this talk. Feel free to share it with people in the network, and hopefully, if they want and feel motivated, they'll find time to watch it. And then share my information too if anyone wants to have a conversation or get questions answered. You can pass my email along. But yeah, there's a lot going on in the world, and this is just one of many things we need to keep designing for and pushing towards. So I so appreciate all of you. Again, like I started by saying, I love this space. I think that now is the time when we can all figure out ways to work together and not be so siloed. And as a person with brothers and a male partner and whatever else, it just means a lot to be here with you today.
Thank you, Amy. Such a treat. Thank you, Andy, again for doing the Zoom work on the back end. Have a great rest of your day, you all. Happy Sunday.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Do any of us want to stay on?